Welcome everyone, my name is Kreestin and this is my list of the top 10 games of 2020. This list is entirely made of games released this year, but I did play it pretty fast and loose with games that either were or currently are still in early release. Up on the screen right now is a complete collection of every game I did get a chance to try this year. There are a few games that I wanted to play but never got around to that I want to acknowledge. They are Ghost of Tsushima, Paper Mario Origami King, and Half-Life Alyx. I also just want to throw out that it's possible that there may be very minor spoilers for each of the games I list, but the video will be divided into chapters, so if you come across a game and are worried about spoilers, you can just skip ahead to the next chapter to avoid them. With that said, let's hop right into the list with my number 10 game of the year, What the Golf? What the Golf is actually a game that came out in late 2019, but it wasn't ported to the Switch until early 2020, so I've made a small exception, aka cheated here. The gameplay at its core is pretty simple. It's a mini-golf style game to start with, and then morphs into all sorts of different mechanics and objectives, ranging from stuff as simple as just making it under par to knocking cats off of a cliff. You eventually move on to other things like launching soccer balls, playing with gravity, and flinging cars around. The game has a lot of silly and clever puns in it, references to other game franchises, and really catchy music, which also often references other game franchises. I picked this game up on a whim and was pleasantly surprised. It's the type of game that I think would be fun for anyone who wants something casual, but also a lot of fun for completionists since there are tough but attainable challenges at each stage of the game. So if you want a good laugh, or you just like mini golf, I say give What the Golf a whirl. Moving on to number 9, we've got Fall Guys. I had been excited for Fall Guys to come out since the first previews of it early on, and I got it right at launch. I sunk a ton of hours into it right off the bat. In case anyone isn't familiar with what Fall Guys is, it's a battle royale game where you play as a bean across a bunch of different obstacle courses and minigames. I'm a sucker for a good battle royale, so Fall Guys was definitely right up my alley. The reason I have Fall Guys ranked relatively low on the list, however, is because early on, especially for the PC launch, the game was pretty plagued by issues that sucked a lot of the fun out of it. There were hackers, the removal of custom names, and there was pretty limited map selection, which were all blemishes on what should have been a perfect game for me. You may have also heard people complain about a lot of the mandatory team games. I personally don't mind the team games as much as some other people, but I do agree there's nothing more deflating than having a great run, only to get stuck on fall ball with 4 other beans who can't keep themselves standing up. To its credit, Fall Guys has come around and fixed a lot of the things that I initially had issues with, namely the hacking and the map rotations. There's now a lot of new rounds, including holiday themes, and when I hopped on to capture gameplay footage for this video, I found myself super easily being sucked right back into that just one more round mentality. All in all, I still think Fall Guys is a very fun game, but I see it more as a game to pick up in short bursts rather than something I'd spend my whole day with. Number 8 on the list is a game called Ghost Runner. Ghost Runner is an action game with a big parkour element. I picked it up because I really enjoyed Mirror's Edge and thought that this looked like it might scratch that same itch. However, I ended up having some of the same qualms with it that I actually had with that game. In Ghost Runner, you play as a ghost runner, and you have to wall run, grapple, and jump around the environment to progress. You also run into enemies that you have to take out along the way. The problem for me is that these enemies also kill you in one hit. You end up having to balance 2 things at once, figuring out the right pattern to traverse the environment in, and figuring out the right pattern to take out the enemies in. Unlike Mirror's Edge, there isn't an option for pacifism. You have to take people out to progress, and sometimes it feels like I was spending double the amount of time on something to figure out both pieces of the game. There's also these weird puzzle sections sprinkled in that tend to bring the action to a screeching halt. However, despite the things I didn't like, the parkour element of the game feels super amazing. It's really satisfying to get through the levels once you get good, and the abilities and attacks really feel great when you pull them off. I haven't had a chance to get super far into it yet, but I'm really enjoying what I've played so far, and I appreciate what it's trying to do, so I had to include it on this year's list. Coming in at number 7 is a game called Neon Abyss. Neon Abyss is a roguelike platformer where you jump around and shoot stuff. As much as I really enjoyed this game, I don't feel like I have a lot to tell you about it. If you've played other roguelikes such as Binding of Isaac or Enter the Gungeon, you'll pretty much know what to expect, and if you haven't played either of those, I'd tell you to turn around and try those first. Neon Abyss has a really cool aesthetic, and the platforming feels really good, but when it first came out, items felt a little imbalanced, which could lead to some pretty frustrating or overpowered runs. However, when I launched the game to get some footage, it appears that they did a very large overhaul at some point because the grid of unlockables had reset for me, and it included a lot of fixes for a lot of things that I was ready to critique, so it wouldn't feel fair to call them out now. I do, however, want to call out that it has this piano minigame that I really love, where you jump around and you just play a song on the piano. That's all there is to say about it, but I love it, and I just wanted to say that I love it. Overall, if you like roguelikes, which I think is a genre that can often be cluttered with a lot of garbage, I think that this one's a pretty well-polished one that's worth checking out. But if you don't like roguelikes, I don't think it's offering anything that's going to really change your mind. Next up at number 6 is a game that I have really complicated feelings about, Final Fantasy VII Remake. Again, please be aware that this is going to have some spoilers. For context, I am a huge fan of the original Final Fantasy VII, and I was super excited to try this game. Like I mentioned, I have a lot of conflicting feelings about this game, so much so that I was originally going to make a whole video about it, so I'm going to try my best to keep it as brief as possible here. I'll start with what I loved about this game. Obviously, seeing one of my favorite games reimagined in modern graphics was really amazing. The first time I walked into Wall Market, I almost cried because I was so blown away. The music is obviously really fantastic. I liked a lot of the new characters like Andrea and Madame M, and I thought that some of the emotional scenes such as the plate drop and Aerith and Elmira's backstories were really well done. I also think that they did a really good job at maintaining the levity of the original game, which I was worried they might chicken out on. For example, I think the new Honeybee Inn scene is really fantastic, and it surprised me. I loved it a lot. I also enjoyed the new combat system overall. I do have some nitpicks with it, such as certain bosses kind of feeling like HP sponges if you accidentally brought the wrong materia with you. But mostly, I thought it was cool and fresh, and I think that Tifa is easily the most fun to play with, followed by Barret, and then Cloud. And quite honestly, I think unfortunately Aerith kind of sucks to play with, but you don't have to. That's the great part. I also really liked seeing characters like Biggs, Wedge, and Jessie and the Shinra Corporation executives get fleshed out, though I don't necessarily like the direction they went with one of my favorite characters, Jessie, who is now inexplicably the world's biggest horn dog, but I'll take what I can get. On the flip side, I felt like the game had quite a few glaring flaws. There is so much padding in this game. There's a ton. The entire Hojo's lab sequence almost made me quit, and consider that Red 13 is one of my favorite video game characters of all time, and the section where you get him almost made me quit this game. I also feel like they kind of copped out on the aftermath of what should have had the biggest emotional hit, the aftermath of the plate drop. I won't go into that for the sake of spoilers, but I will just say that I was a bit let down. I also loathe the whispers. I hate the whispers and the entire final act of the game, basically. I want to make it clear that I am totally not opposed to storyline changes, but the whispers were done in such a hokey way that it made me very worried for the future of the story. The entire final section of the game, to me, felt like it was ripped directly out of Kingdom Hearts, which is also super worrisome. As a fan of both Kingdom Hearts and Final Fantasy X, I feel that I'm justified in being worried about a reinvention of the story with the people responsible for Kingdom Hearts 3 and the Final Fantasy X audio drama at the helm. We'll just have to wait and see, but for now, Final Fantasy VII Remake lands perfectly in my kind of good but mostly okay category of games. Retiring my Final Fantasy rants and getting back to the list, we have The Pedestrian ranking in at number 5. The Pedestrian is a side-scrolling puzzle game that came out very early in the year, and I actually only caught wind of it from a Twitch stream. The gist is that you're one of those little people that live inside a street sign, and you make your way along moving from sign to sign by solving puzzles. You rearrange signs and have to figure out the proper way to connect them to one another to navigate little mazes, retrieve objects, and keep moving on. I think it's a super good-looking game and that it was a lot of fun. Unfortunately, I got stuck on a puzzle about 2/3 of the way in, and then I had to retire it. But I had enough fun with it that not only do I want to recommend it, but I want to get back to it at some point and get past the point I was stuck at. I would like to figure it out. I think the game deserves a lot more recognition than it got. It's unique, and it's a nice refreshing return to puzzle games that aren't just pixel graphics. So I think if you like puzzle games, you should give The Pedestrian a shot. At number 4 on my list, we've got a game that everyone was buzzing about this year, Animal Crossing New Horizons. I've played Animal Crossing in the past, starting with Wild World on the DS, and then City Folk, and then New Leaf. As with all Animal Crossing games, I spent a few months dumping close to 300 hours into this one, and then one day just promptly dropped it, and now only check in to get yelled at by my villagers and pick weeds on special occasions. I'll get what needs to be said out of the way. Yes, there are a lot of quality of life problems with this game, like tools breaking, only being able to craft one thing at a time, and repetitive dialogue across similar personality types. As someone with 3 lazies and 3 crankies on their island, I am well versed in how annoying the repeated dialogue can be. If I hear about the bugs in the floorboards one more time, I might scream. But I love it anyway, and I think it's cute. And I can't deny that I loved a game that I spent almost 300 hours in. The timing of the game's release was absolutely perfect. Nintendo's delay ended up being the biggest blessing in disguise, because the best thing to do while you're locked inside all day is play Animal Crossing. I don't really know what to say about Animal Crossing because it's definitely one of those you love it or you don't type of games. I personally love the collection aspect of the game, so I dumped a lot of time into completing my fish and bug collections until about July, when I could not for the life of me find a hammerhead shark, and gave up. I also loved that in this iteration we can put items outside and terraform. I do not have an eye for interior design, or really design in general for that matter, but I had a lot of fun setting up different areas of town, including the world's dumbest graveyard, and theming my own house as that neighbor with a weird junkyard in their lawn. Animal Crossing is great, and it did exactly what I needed it to, which was give me tons of hours of fun and a cool way to connect with my friends in a time where I otherwise couldn't. It's time to put on your helmets and your pads because we're old now and safety is cool, and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2 is my number 3 game of 2020. I think this game is almost perfect for what it is. It's a remake of the first 2 games in the Tony Hawk series, but it includes a lot of the features and moves that came along later in the series. I had actually just replayed Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 3 shortly before they announced the remake, so how the old games played is pretty fresh in my mind, and let me tell you that I think that this game does an amazing job at modernizing things. I'm pretty sure it was my friend Mike, and I'm sorry to whoever said it if it wasn't my friend Mike, but he described it as the game feels like how you remember Tony Hawk playing when we were kids, but it's not actually how it played. And I think that that's a very apt way to put it. The game is a full nostalgia blast from start to finish, but it's also very well done, and it didn't feel to me like a cheap cash grab in any way. It felt like the people who made this game really loved the franchise and wanted to put out a good game for the franchise. It was a ton of fun to me to see all the old levels brought back to life, as well as the skaters. As someone who has long since fallen out of skateboarding, I also appreciated the inclusion of the newer generation of skaters as playable characters. I liked learning about the new people and watching their tapes when I unlocked them. My biggest qualm with the game was originally that when you beat career mode, that was it. You were done. You could only go back and collect stat points on other characters or do challenges. But yet again, I was greeted with a patch when I launched the game to record gameplay. So, problem solved! Now you can go through and complete career mode as each individual character, which is just what the game needed. I'm ready to dump a ton more hours into it after learning that I can do that, and kind of had to stop myself from playing because I was like, I'll just complete this career mode real quick, and then realized I did not have the time for that. But I liked this game so much that I even paid for PlayStation Plus again, because I wanted to try out the online, which was fun, but I think was a bit limited. And the only other limitation that I can think of in this game is the Create a Skater, which isn't as robust as a game from this generation probably should be, but it's a $30 game, so I can't say that that's really a deal breaker for me. If you like the old Tony Hawk games, or you even have a passing interest in them, I say try this remake out. I don't think you'll regret it. It's a great game. It's a solid game. There's practically nothing wrong with it, and that's why I have it on my list. Coming in at number 2 on my top games of 2020 list is Hades. I assume by now most people have heard of Hades, but just in case, it's a roguelike hack and slash where you play as the son of Hades, called Zagreus, who is trying to escape from the underworld, getting help from Olympians and other notable figures from Greek mythology along the way. I love roguelikes, so it's probably not a surprise to anyone that this was one of my favorite games of the year, but I cannot emphasize how good I think Hades is. I do love Supergiant's style, just in general. Bastion is another one of my favorite games, but I don't consider myself a blind loyalist to them by any means. I didn't really love Transistor, and I've never tried Pyre. I just really like what they do as a studio, and I think they put out solid work. And this is no exception. I think the music, the art style, and the combat are all near perfect in this game. I really don't have any complaints. For me, though, the thing that this game does best, in my opinion, is that I think it corrects what bothers a lot of people about other roguelikes. I think that in other roguelikes, the death of a run can really feel pointless if you're not into the genre. You might unlock items to use on your future runs, but it can really feel like an uphill battle that isn't necessarily worth it. In Hades, the death of a run means you get story progression. Yes, you also unlock new powers and skills, but you also get to mingle with the residents and get to know them better, upgrade the living quarters, and then you set off to try again. So dying in this game actually serves a purpose, and you'd lose a lot of the fun of the game if you were constantly winning. They also adjust for people who are normally good at the game by introducing heat levels and modifiers later on, from my understanding. I personally am not good enough to go into details on those, since I haven't unlocked them yet. I actually haven't spent as much time as I'd like to with Hades yet because I specifically had to pull myself away from playing it. It's super tempting to just try over and over again, especially as you get closer and closer to finishing the task at hand. Like I mentioned, I love the combat, and my weapon of choice is the Twin Fists because I like to play aggro. There's also fishing, which is an instant boost to any game for me. I love a good fishing minigame. And a lot of people I know are very into petting dogs in games, so I'm happy to report you can pet the Cerberus. Congratulations. There's been a lot of hype around Hades this year, and I've been very glad to see it. I think it deserves all the hype in the world, and then some. Before we get to number 1, I just wanted to quickly highlight a few honorable mentions that didn't quite make the cut this year. The first of them is BPM, which stands for Bullets Per Minute. This is a roguelike rhythm FPS, which on paper sounds like someone just checked off some of my favorite genres, but it's actually a very fun game. The only problem is the graphics on it are pretty janky, including some insane purposeful saturation that the creators insist on defending, but it's kind of hard to look at. You can lower the saturation, but it doesn't improve it enough, I don't think. I also think that the UI is kind of hard to navigate when you first start playing it since it just drops you in and sets you free, but once you get used to it, it's really fun, especially if you like rhythm games and FPS games. It's a great combination. The next game is Murder by Numbers, which is a visual novel Picross game about a crime-solving actress and her sidekick robot. Do you like Picross? If yes, try this game. If no, don't try this game. I'm just bad at Picross and got stuck, so I had to leave it off the list. Heartspace Shipbreaker is another cool game that's currently in early access. The gist is you're a ship salvager in space, and you salvage things to pay off your debts. It's a really cool game, but unfortunately, it gave me motion sickness. So if you don't get motion sick, I'd say try it out, but if you do get motion sickness, run as far away as you possibly can. And finally, Spiritfarer. In Spiritfarer, you play as a ferry master who helps spirits transition towards the afterlife. You manage your ship, so it's mostly a management sim, but there are a lot of meaningful storyline points along the way. I just didn't feel like playing an emotionally heavy game at the time, so I kind of fell off of it, but I definitely think it's worth a try, and it's a very pretty game as well. Now that we're done with honorable mentions, it's time for the big reveal on my number 1 game of 2020. Buckle up, because it's Kingdom Hearts Melody of Memory. I don't necessarily think that this was the best game of 2020, but it's 100% the game that I got the most enjoyment out of. For anyone that doesn't know, Final Fantasy Theater Rhythm is one of my all-time favorite games, and Melody of Memory was like a dream game of mine. You can ask anybody who is willing to listen that I would constantly say that I wanted a Final Fantasy Theater Rhythm, but with Kingdom Hearts music. I've been saying it for years. When they announced this game, I was over the moon, and that's exactly what this is. It's an updated take on that style of rhythm game, and it has music from the entire Kingdom Hearts franchise. I personally had fallen off of Kingdom Hearts pretty hard in recent years, mostly because I was very let down by Kingdom Hearts 3, but this game sucked me right back in. The music in Kingdom Hearts has always been really meaningful to me, and I don't think that I could properly express how much so I love it in this video. But when this game launched up and the jazz version of Dearly Beloved started to play, I was practically beside myself. The game serves as a story recap of the franchise so far. As you progress along the map, Kairi narrates what happened at pivotal points in the games in the franchise. There is some new lore packed in at the end of the game, but it's very minimal and it's at the very end of the game. So if you're only interested in the new lore and you don't like rhythm games, just look up the new stuff. It's only about 10 minutes worth of new content and the rest is entirely recaps. The gameplay is simple. You just hit the right buttons along to the rhythm of your favorite songs from the games. There are a few different styles of stages, including memory dives and boss battles, but for the most part, you'll be running along tracks fighting enemies to the beat of the music. Each level has different challenges tied to it, which encourages you to revisit worlds or to try them on higher difficulties. My absolute favorite course to play in the game is Vector to the Heavens, which is from a game that I don't even like, actually. So if you don't like the side games, but you do like the music in the franchise, this game is perfect for you. There's also unlockable Disney songs. Just plain old Disney songs. There's 3 of them that you can play, which I loved. It's so silly that you're just playing along to the song Beauty and the Beast as Sora whacks Heartless and Nobody's in the face. But I loved every bit of it. You can also play as 4 different teams of characters in the game, so there's lots of replay value in leveling up your characters and perfecting your scores. And it's also nice if, say you like Aqua a ton, you can play that party. Have Aqua in your party. You like Xion? Bring her in. I have no shame in saying that putting this at number 1 is a completely biased choice, and it will probably get me some strange looks, but I really, really loved this game. I can't wait to have it as a travel game since I have it on the Switch, and I think it'll go next to Theater Rhythm as an all-time favorite for me. So that's why I had to put it in at number 1. Thank you guys for sticking it out with me and going over my top 10 games of 2020. This was a bit of a patchy year as far as games are concerned for me, but I still managed to get enjoyment out of quite a few of them. If you're interested at all in watching me play games, both new and old, I do have a Twitch channel where I do that. There are links in the description, and I hope to see you there sometime. See you next time, and thanks again.